Thank you. That was Jason Geistweidt's performance. There he is. And the performance was called Condition of the Biconditionary.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. I can't hear you yet, but I'm going to work on that.
Okay.
Give me 2 seconds.
You're echoing too.
Hey, I'm on headphones now. What's up?
Okay, great. So I'm just going to read your bio now. And welcome to Plasma 2021, the 7th lecture. And our guest performer tonight is Jason Geistweidt. And Jason Geistweidt is an artist and scholar working across the fields of sound composition, physical computing, creative coding, real-time performance systems, and installation. In his creative work, he utilizes computation as a means for organizing time and space, invoking the event, and creating experience. His current research interests lie in the study of media impermanence and the transitory nature of computation. In 2019, large-scale prints from his Twitage project, which procedurally collage images captured from the Twitter fire hose, the Twitage project was featured in the group show Unsettling Time at Vanderbilt University. His thoughts on the future of media study appear in the 2020 inaugural issue of MAST, the Journal of Media Art Study and Theory. And I'll put the links to his 2 articles that students read for today in the chat. Thanks. His electroacoustic works have been presented at both ICMC and the NI conferences. Jason Geistweidt holds a PhD from the Sonic Arts Research Center, Queen's University Belfast, and a master's from the Center for Computational Musicology and Computer Music at the University of Limerick. His amateur radio call sign is KD2SJGY. I'll put that in the chat as well. And perhaps most significantly for this audience, Jason is also an assistant professor in the Department of Media Study here at University of Buffalo. And so we're very glad to have him and his performance and his continuing remixing of me. And now he'll give a short presentation about his work, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you, Jason.
Hey, thanks. I'm sorry about all the technical issues, but kind of been moving around with mixing media in different ways. I need to put headphones on real quick so I don't get any feedback, and then I will talk to you. Okay, so. Perfect. Can you see this? Can you hear this?
Yes.
I think I'm in full screen. Okay, great. So thank you very much, Paige, for having me, and thank you, Cortland, for navigating chat and things like that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what I do and sort of my thoughts about creativity and what I'm thinking and my thoughts about media. And I did read your questions. Paige sent them to me a couple of hours ago, and I had a chance to go through them. And man, tough questions, really good. Really deep things and things that I had forgotten that I had written about. So thank you so much. And I look forward to addressing your questions and things like that. So anyway, my name's Jason Geistweidt, and I'm going to talk today about media making, process, experience, experiments, which are kind of the same, and knowledge creation, which I think is what we're doing here in media study. There were a lot of great questions about what is media study and sort of my general approach to what media study is. So I wanted to talk about that. as well. So for myself, I'm going to kind of talk from my perspective. I can't speak for everyone in the department. I can't speak for every artist, obviously, but I'm going to give you my perspective, and that's what artists do. That's what I hope that you as media makers will do. You will provide your perspective as well to all of us. So I'm primarily interested in the process of media making, okay? And that's a verb. That's a process. I'm not so much interested in making objects per se, but sometimes I do make objects, and sometimes I make films or sounds or pictures or whatever, but it's really the process that leads up to that that is important to me. I'm interested in creativity as a whole, how people create, why people create, and how media is generated in real time. And I'm very interested in real-time processes, or processes that are sort of happening in the moment, in the instance, and maybe you're somewhat out of your control, right? So it's about making systems, it's about making processes, and not so much about making things, but things do result, they do come out at the end. And I'm also interested in the ways in which artists sort of enter into the creative space. So there's not just one way to make a film, or one way to make a podcast, or one way to, make a widget or whatever you're making. There are different ways, and some people enter it with an idea. Some people enter it, they can walk around the corner and they see something exciting or something like that, and it really influences them. Some people get interested because somebody offers them an opportunity to do something, right? But for me, it seems to be that I'm really interested in, hey, I got all this stuff. What can I do with it, right? And for me, media kind of is, to some extent, stuff, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. In any sense. So there's that. How do people enter into the creative act? And then also there's sort of a part of it which is saying, how do the decisions you make, or can you work with materials and media in a way to sort of force one's hand? Which is the big question is, what do you do when you get stuck creatively, right? And you want to create something and you're trying to move ahead, but it's just you're kind of stuck. Well, I think what you need to do is you need to sort of come up with a new process or a new way of approaching your materials, and that's kind of the whole of what I'm about. I'm making these processes to play with these materials, to kind of build these resultant cultural artifacts. Okay, I can tell I'm not being too specific about anything. So anyway, so what are the techniques and the tactics that are utilized by myself and others to sort of engage materiality, to engage materials, and to do what I think all artists do, which is they organize time and space, all right? And not only do they organize things in time and space, but they also organize time itself and space itself. So you can have a unit of time and you can organize it and play with it. And you can have a unit of space and you can play with that as well. Maybe we'll get into that. And I'm sure you'll have questions about anything, or maybe you have no questions. I don't know. So what kind of questions do arise when you're organizing time and space? What comes next? And what has come before? That's kind of an open, big, gigantic, sort of broad situation up at the top. I tend to want to go a little bit deeper, which is, how did I get here? What is the situation? This thing is making all these weird sounds and these images are coming out. I really like this. Can I repeat this? Or maybe I don't like this. How do I not repeat this, right? What is the way to get into that situation and to get out of that situation? So how did I get here? And how can I take this and maybe move ahead to something else, or even move back to something that I believe may have happened before, or something like that. So I like to talk about this idea of appropriate rates of change, okay? And if you're familiar with John Cage, this is kind of a John Cage sort of thing, I guess. And what is this appropriate rate of change? It's sort of my central question. It's not a value judgment in any way. It doesn't have to do with it being good or it being bad. It has to do with, an evaluation, kind of what I call the internal marker, right? Which sort of delineates when I think that we need to go here or we need to go there. So you're a cinematographer. When do you know that you need to move the camera to the left or the right, or to pull focus or pull in or whatever? Or you're making, you're doing some coding or something like that. And how is it that you just sort of instinctually know that maybe I need a for loop here or something like that? Well, it's something that you need to be in tune with, I think, or maybe that artists need to be in tune with how they delineate when they feel that they need to move in a certain direction. So you're on a road trip. This is kind of my quick idea that you're on a road trip, you're driving, and you're going through these wonderful byways and passageways that we have throughout the United States, and maybe you pull over to go to some sort of scenic outlook or something like this. And when you do that, maybe you'll look at the mountains and the valleys and trees and all this, and perhaps you'll stay there 3 or 4 minutes. But there's a point at which it's like, okay, it's time to move on, right? It's time to have some change, right? And change is really good. Some people will come in and they're like camp there for 6 months, right? So, and that's fine. That maybe they're working at a different rate of acceptable change, whatever is acceptable for them. And some people won't even get off the road, right? So, there are different ways, and this sort of, what the decisions you make are really important decisions as a creator, as an artist, media maker, whatever you call yourself, because these are different for every individual, and it really defines what is your personal style, what are the things that make you what you are, and these sort of determinations get stamped onto the type of work that you will make. The way you see the world, the way I see the world right now is that it's all cut up in little pieces, and we're kind of cramming it together and reorganizing it in our heads, right? That's what that was all about to some extent, right? That's how I organize the world. You're going to organize the world a different way. I'm not looking at the chat. Are we doing okay, Cortland, or anything?
We're doing okay. I'll let you know.
All right. I'm just so used to feedback, and it's like I feel like I'm talking to a PowerPoint presentation. So if everyone's cool, I'm going to continue going on.
Mm-hmm.
So something that's really important to me is material. All right. And we talk about media. And my process is a material-based practice. So what is media study? That's a question that came up a great deal in some of the questions I saw or some of the statements that I saw. And I think that it really is about media, right? And media is that material, right? It is the stuff of which material is the stuff of which media is made, right? Media, matter, mother, medium, all these words that sort of mean like the source, right? And I think that everything comes from this source. It's the object. When I talk about objects, and maybe theorists talk about media objects, they're talking about these physical things. Some of them are talking about conceptual things as well, but that's fine. We don't have to worry about that right now. But it's really the stuff. All right. And again, stuff is sort of like my term for it. It doesn't mean to say that it's bad stuff or good stuff. It's just stuff, right? I'm feeling like I'm doing a George Carlin routine here or something. So materials in and of themselves sort of have these relationships built into them, and they're known as affordances, right? And if you've taken a design course or something like that, you may be familiar with this word. Affordances are kind of these properties, are elements that sort of define the use of what you're doing. So, what can you do with, celluloid film? What is the materiality of celluloid film? Well, it's cellulose, so it's like this chemical base. I think it's made from cotton or something. I don't know what it's made from. But then inside of that, there's this silver nitrate substrate that causes crystals. So really film is, frames, right? And frames are actually crystals. And if we want to go digital, we can say that, we have files, and files have certain things you can do with them, right? You can name files, and you can misname files, and you can put files in folders, and you can group files together, right? It's the way that you work with it, or it has that sort of affordance. And files are made of films, which are made of frames, and frames are made of pixels, and pixels are made of RGBA values, and RGBA, I'm getting kind of computational here, right? I'm looking at things sort of somewhat digitally, and RGBA values can, be 8-bit, 0 to 255, or maybe the 32-bit, you have these numbers, and then numbers in turn, turns into ones and zeros, on and off switches. And at each stage in that point, you can find another way to get into the creative process. You can say, oh, it's ones and zeros. Well, what happens if I make all the ones zeros and make all the zeros ones? I have no idea, but that's the way I work, right? Let's find out. Right? Nobody knows, so let's find out. Right? So materials will reveal to you how they want to be used. I feel like a religious preacher up here. Materials will reveal to you how you want to be, how they wish to be used. And there will be congruences that you will find. And in my work, I'm looking for congruences and juxtapositions, which really are relations between things. And these relations will be created and they will be discovered. And it's that discovery process of working with raw digital materials, right, that is interesting to me. So my goal is sort of to get out of the way, right? I simply want to let these materials kind of speak for themselves, right? And there's a variety of digital materials, we'll talk about those in a minute, that went into this piece. I'll talk more about this piece as well. And certainly if you have any questions about this, I'm more than happy to answer that. So I want to get out of the way. I want let these materials sort of resonate in their own cultural aspect or whatever, in ways that maybe they have never been seen before or heard before, right? I mean, if it's kind of like a bell. You ring it and it's going to make a sound, right? Well, what happens if you hit the side of a car? It's going to make a different type of sound. So we want to activate these materials and see what they have to do. And there are affordances, but I would claim also that there are hidden affordances, all right? Things that are there that you don't know are there until you actually start to take them apart. And just briefly to talk about that, I have a number of computers that I used for this performance tonight, and I'm really curious what it sounded like on the other end, but I can't wait to hear the recording. And these machines are talking to one another over networks. And one of the networks that I'm using is that I'm using some sound information to actually push some of the video filtering that's going on, hue, saturation, brightness, opacity, things like that. And usually, opacity is, at least I'll talk about the software I'm using. Usually the opacity is between 0 and 100. So I give it 100, full image, 0, completely different, right? What happens if I give it 10,000? Right? Well, I found out with the hue, saturation, and brightness that, hue goes between -360 and 360. Well, if I give it a number like 2,367, it breaks the machine, right? And you may have seen in that there was some video that was like not only saturated, but so super saturated that it just turned into big squares, all right? That's part of the research process of working with materials. That's part of my process. When I find those things, all of it sudden is like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Right? And you're only going to find that if you're working in a way, well, I'm not saying you're only going to find that. I mean, for me, I think that you more readily find that if you are in fact kind of screwing around, right? But doing it in a good way so that you can find something that hasn't been found before. So yes, you can overdrive the hue and saturation filter by giving it a ridiculous number, right? So that's cool. And have you tried breaking it? That's the last thing that maybe I'll make a suggestion to you at some point. There were some questions about, how can media artists like improve the world and something like that. Well, one way you can do it is to take things apart. And so when I say breaking it, that means that you're looking at things materialistically and you're saying, what are the parts? And you're going to pull it apart, right? And you can physically do that, or you can do that by looking at Twitter and, say, oh, I know what's going on here. People are arguing and the upvotes are getting there because people are arguing and it's all this negative stuff gets promoted, and it's all just a big advertising platform anyway. So there's that. Okay, so what's next? Where was I? Whoop, went too fast. See, I don't know how to use technology. Okay, so let's talk about the material components, all right? And I kind of alluded to this already, that are in this piece, all right? This is where I would have a question and answer. This is where I say, what did you see? But it's kind of hard to do that with Zoom right now. So
there is a question in the chat if you want to know about sounds.
Yeah, fire away. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Sean was asking if about Foley sounds. Have you ever would you consider yourself a Foley artist? Did you ever focus on Foley as a profession for films?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've always been very interested in how images and sounds come together. So I would say that this whole piece is sort of auto-Foleyed in a strange way, because there is a connection between the sounds being made and the video treatment that's being done. So it's kind of like reversing that process. I mean, usually you think like somebody's walking down the street. I'm going to take some shoes and I'm going to make now they're walking in sand and stuff like that. But what if you were to reverse that process, Sean? What if you were to say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to Foley this entire film with all the wrong sounds, right? That's kind of an interesting way to approach it. I'm not saying it's going to be successful, and it might be maybe sophomoric or something like that, but there might be like 2 or 3 seconds where it's like, oh, that is interesting. I'm going to expand that idea, right? So the images used in here they're all sort of archival video. There are local webcams. There's 3 of them here to create sort of some feedback. One on me, one across the screen, and another one that's sort of shooting from over here. So there's local webcams. There's also remote webcams. So a lot of the exterior shots that you saw were live photos, live video coming in. And there's always cool things that happen that you can't expect because I think at one point the radio telescope in Russia or wherever it is starts moving, right? And then I just sort of stay there a while because I think that's cool because it's moving in real time. It's completely unexpected. On the sound realm of things, there are field recordings and found sounds. Some of them are recordings that have, and there's only like 8 or 9 recordings that comprise the whole soundscape. And you kind of limit yourself to sort of try to create something that's sort of, concise, I guess. If it was changing too much, not the rate of change again, right? If it changes too much, maybe there's nothing to actually grab onto. If it doesn't change enough, you're just kind of like, well, I don't know. So anyway, so these field recordings are things that I've made. Some of them are things that I've found from other people, and they're kind of sounds that are intimate to me, but you wouldn't know that. But I kind of know where things are. And some of these films, there's one film, there's this carpet commercial that I use in all my classes, and that always shows up in my work somewhere. Why? Because it's just this thing I'm kind of fond of, right? There's some text as well. We can talk about the text in a bit, but the text was sort of grabbed from some processes I had taken Guy Debord's Society of Spectacle and sort of just ran it through some AI filters for a while to see what would come out the other side. And I knew I wanted to have text as sort of another way that people, an observer, could enter into this piece. So I grabbed some of that text, and we can talk about that process too if you're interested. And then there's always this computation and processing, and like my bio says, I'm a computational media creator, right? And computation is this process of looking at everything sort of as data, right? And processing video and audio and digital streams, right? There's digital streams moving between these computers, digital streams moving out to you in Zoom, and actually you're streaming images back to me at the same time. So it's this sort of feedback going on. And then there's software applications. And what I'm kind of playing with and what I'm interested in is sort of the interoperability between different processes. Because if you have a digital camera, you can make it talk to anything else that's digital, right? Because there's a protocol, a digital protocol. Here we're using something called Websockets, which I'll talk about in a second, to make these connections. So anyway, any other questions so far? So I'm just not talking. Are we all right?
Yeah, no questions in the chat. Other questions in the chat so far.
No, okay, cool.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So how much of the images that we saw during your performance were actually live ones?
About half.
Half? All right.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the first, it's in 5 movements kind of, or 5 sections that are based on different collections of sounds versus audio. So there's this beautiful one looking out over Paris, and you see the Eiffel Tower and the searchlight is going around. That kind of shows up briefly. There's a couple of antennas that are turning all the time. I guess so that's in there. A lot of the interior shots, anything that's an interior shot or an exterior shot. So there's a computer room, which is somewhere in Indiana. So I'm kind of interested in this idea of how we use networks to sort of interconnect these spaces and sort of this interoperability of existence between different sites and things like that. So there's that. Come on, let's go to the next one. Okay, so basically there's a 2-part performance system going on here, and I won't get too into the weeds, but you might be sort of interested in some of this. The audio is being generated in real time using these very simple, natural recordings. There's recordings of birds, there's recordings of floors creaking, there's recordings of bottles knocking into one another. And I'm using this process called granular synthesis. And remember I talked about how material is also time. And when you have 10 2 feet of film, you can look at it and you can say, this is so many frames and this represents so much time. Well, it's very similar in the digital world as well. You can have, so many samples or so much data, right? And that data represents a certain amount of time. So with granular synthesis, you kind of basically have an audio file, and these audio files range from like 2 seconds to some of them are about 35 seconds. And you're taking very small, minuscule little pieces of it, right? So maybe 30 milliseconds, 250 milliseconds. And you take these pieces and you pull them out and you just pile them on top of one another. So it's like grains of sand, right? It's like if you had, trying to think of an example, right? So if you had a beach, right, and you just pulled out all these grains and just started rearranging them. So the beach was continuous, but now you're making it discontinuous. And they're sort of being thrown back and forth across the right-left audio spectrum. There's a little reverb in there that kind of cleans it up a bit. And then I have a system that's based in this piece of software called Max, all right? And Max is a software that we teach here in the department, and you can do a lot of things with it. It's sort of a media production piece of software. And that media production piece of software, you kind of build, right? And it's built around materials, right? So you have samples, you have video assets, things like that. And then there are different modules that you can use to sort of treat that. And you build these modules up, and you connect them, and it's like Legos for media systems, basically. You build what you want, and then you throw the stuff in, and something comes out the back end of it, and you go, okay, that's interesting or not, and you redo it, right? So here what's happening is I have some recordings. I'm pulling them apart. I can pick the position within the file where I want to start. And that position can move around in real time. I can pick how big I want that grain to be. Do I want it to be like really small? Then it's kind of like popcorn, like 30 milliseconds, like, or if it's like a 2-second grain, which is almost not a grain, it's more like a small pebble, perhaps. Then it's almost like tiling audio files on top of one another. And you create these densities, right? And densities that are, horizontal, long densities, and densities that are like getting thicker on top of one another as well. So you notice I'm not even talking about content or narrative or story, because that's not how I approach things, right? That comes later for me, and maybe we can talk about that at some point. But this is the way that I'm organizing sound, is with thinking of activity and sounds and thicknesses and stuff like that. So not only can I choose like playback rates? Do I want them to play lower or higher? How big is the spread between where I choose them? But I can also randomize that, right? And so over here, I can click these off and on, and all of a sudden it just starts randomizing all this information. So it's just a mess, right? But if you kind of do it in the right way and sort of prepare for it, the mess can be quite beautiful. So there are 18 of these granulators. And so this is what my interface looks like. Did I put a picture of that in here? Where is it? This is what my interface looks like, all right? I have 18 of these granulators. And not only are they pulling sound apart, but they're also listening to the audio that's coming out of them, all right? They're listening to the audio that's coming out of them. They're doing like an envelope mapping. So if a sound goes, pow, like that, it gets loud and then it gets soft, I'm getting a number that's going 0 up to 0.9 and down to here. So now I have this number, right, that sort of represents the gestural information that's coming out of the granulator, right? I'm taking that gestural information and I'm putting it through this thing called Websockets, right? And I'm piping it over to the second part of this system, which is, and I can go into this a little bit later, but I'm mapping the audio gesture and I'm going into video, all right? So on the video side, which is this computer over here, which is also the one that I'm speaking from right now in the streaming. See, it's all about space, isn't it? I have a little piece of software called OBS Production Studio, which you might be familiar with. It's an audiovisual streaming suite that YouTube influencers use, and a lot of gamers use this to send their practice, their gaming practice, out onto Twitch and things like that. But also OBS Production Studio has this really cool way that it sort of allows you to have a television station, if you would, on your computer. And you can just sort of mix things and add filters and stuff like that. So this OBS Production Studio, again, it sort of has this material approach, right? It has scenes, right? And you can switch between scenes. This piece has 5 scenes, right? The piece that I just did has 5 scenes, 5 sections. And those scenes have sources, right? And sources are comprised of video files, webcams, different types of images, text, things like that. So you can pull that in. And then it has these things called filters where you can actually go from scene to source to filter. And filter is actually working on the pixel itself, right? And this is where you can do gamma correction and hue correction, and you can even rotate things and move stuff around. And you're actually playing with the math inside the frame, if you would. And the beauty of it is that at some point, because it's open source and we love open source stuff, this is free. You should download it and start playing with it immediately. Try to break it if you can. Has a WebSocket server in it. And a WebSocket server is nothing more than just a way that 2 digital devices, 2 applications can talk to one another. So you have this inter-application communication. So remember back here, I have gestural information, right? As the sound gets louder and softer and moves across. And then I use WebSockets to pipe that information into OBS Studio so that I can look at hue and saturation, right? And I can say, okay, when this gets loud, the hue is going to go up. Or I can reverse it and say, when this gets loud, the picture is going to go out, right? And the opacity falls away. So these mappings are really, really important to creating a variety of activity, which follows the idea of, what was it I called it before? Follows this idea of, it's the end of the day, guys. And it follows this idea of appropriate change, all right? So I kind of set this system up in such a way to make something that talks to me, all right? And then I share that with you. And that is how media can be didactic. And I can teach you the way that I see the world, all right? At least within the context of this information. So I got 18 granulators cutting up the sound, sending them out, gestural mapping. Gestural mapping information is going into here, and it's turning video on and off and cross-mixing video and doing all that sort of stuff. And then this is the interface that I'm working with. And the only thing I'm doing is I'm turning switches off and on, all right? And every now and then, when everything's off, I can pop something up and then mix things. And so it's kind of a crude way of mixing, but it worked for what we needed to do here today. So here's the performance system, just to break it down. How long have I been going for? Probably long enough. There's 2 CPUs. Max MSP is running on CPU 1. This is the audio processing machine. This is also the performance interface, all right? This interface is on this machine. And audio is coming out of that machine and going over to machine number 2, right? Where it goes out to the internet along with whatever OBS Studio, which is sort of the video controller for all this, is going out as well. So these go out as parallel. There's an audio track and a video track, and Zoom takes them in separately and then mixes them. And you hear and see whatever you saw and heard. And that's another thing when you're doing this remote kind of remote local thing. I'm always curious about what I experience here and how you experience it on your side. And the thing is that between there's like 50 of us or something like that. I don't know how many are here today. Anyway, so amongst all of us, we're all having different experiences, right? All from the same material. So that's kind of cool. Also on the OBS Studio, that's where the local cams and the remote cams. So these are IP cams. So that's a fun thing to do. Just go out and look at open cameras that people have left open. It's kind of cool. So there's that. So I got 2 more slides and then we're done. I'm going to drink some water. Any questions?
Not yet.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to, it's so weird not getting any feedback, right? And that's the problem. That is a negative affordance of this interface, right? So media making, this is in conclusion. All right. I'm engaged in an experimental practice, and there are many people here in this department, both professors and graduate students and undergraduates, that are sort of involved in this experimental practice. And media making, as I said, is about organizing time and space, organizing time and space in time and space. And really, your process, whatever it is that you're doing as a creative, I'm kind of putting this back on you now, is really your methodology for putting things together, right? It's also your methodology for how you tear things apart. And that tearing apart is often called like media analysis, right? How is it that you choose to analyze something? And, you know, if you can get enough people to go along with your media analysis, you can, you know, become a professor or something like that, right? And what you want to do is you kind of want to find new ways. I think I'm interested in finding new ways for arranging media objects, for arranging materials. And I think what this does, and the reason I do this, is because it comes from the material itself. The material kind of dictates what it wants to do, and it creates a new way of seeing, of hearing, of really interfacing with the world. And it doesn't always work, but what does, right? Sometimes you find something, it's like, oh, that's cool. I'll do that once. I'll do that twice. Maybe I'll take this and like throw it away and kind of rebuild the whole thing and do it again. But I've learned something from that. And art can be didactic. Media can be didactic. And by doing this, I'm able to show you something and show you a new way of doing, of organizing the world, basically, right? So when we create new media work, we're engaging in knowledge creation, all right? You're not just making a film or a podcast or a sculpture or a dance or whatever it is that you happen to be doing. You're actually making new knowledge. And we should open ourselves up to new ideas. Making new knowledge creates new combinations and really new ways of seeing. And I think that that's kind of what I may have been trying to get at in some of my writings, is this idea that we need to be open, we need to play a bit in order to see if maybe things can work out a different way. So your questions are great. I'm looking forward to being stumped by all of them. But I will end with this. There were a lot of questions about what the heck is media study, right? Or maybe I've come to a different understanding of media study. And Savannah Walker, your question just stuck with me. And I don't know if you're here, but anyway, Savannah had a question about how practitioners of media study might come to renew and sort of move culture forward, which I think are my words, which sounds quite pompous now that I think about it. But I think what you need to do, and I'm not telling you what to do in any way, I'm not, you know, but I'll answer Savannah's question. What can I say? I think media artists sort of you need to take an opportunity to sort of give your perspective of the world. And when you make something, like I said, you're making knowledge, right? You're engaging in the exchange of knowledge when you show your stuff. I'm engaging in an exchange of knowledge like this, right? And it's a two-way exchange, by the way. You're about to teach me a lot of things, right? And I want to tell you about me, and you're going to tell me about you, and it's going to be fantastic. Savannah, I think you need to have a willingness to engage in play and in experimentation. I think this can help sort of renew culture so that we don't get stuck in a rut, as it were. I would encourage all of us to sort of have an open-endedness to what we're doing and to some extent a purposelessness. Not everything has to have a purpose, or let's put it this way. Sometimes you can make things that you don't know what they're going to be until you've made them, right? And I'm a big proponent of practice before theory, right? And, you know, we can go back and forth. Obviously, everything I'm presenting right now is my theory about what I'm doing, right? So that's fine. But I think that theory and practice have to, you know, do the handshake, right? They kind of come together, right? Savannah, I would encourage a desire to take risks and to try new things and to allow yourself to make mistakes. And when I say take risks, don't do anything dangerous, obviously. But, you know, if you decide that you're going to make this machine that when you push the button, it just goes, you know, who knows what you could do with that, where you can put it, how you could embed it within the community or inside your space or whatever. So maybe you just make something and just leave it there, right? And just say, okay, what's that thing doing? and you wait, right? And maybe it won't do anything, and maybe you'll make something else 10 years later, and they start talking to one another for some reason. I mean this like seriously, they start talking to each other, but also like conceptually they may start talking to each other. So you need to be open to that space. And I think that media practitioners and artists teach us how to be open to that space, because that's the keynote of media literacy, right? I mean, media literacy is about knowing what you're seeing. So at some point you have to step back and you have to look at what's going on and say, oh, everything's an advertisement. Okay. Anyway, so be open to change, be open to flux, realize that things are in motion. And if they aren't in motion, find out why. And be open to sort of rethinking the medium, whatever it may be for you. Maybe you are a documentary filmmaker, right? Well, what does documentary film actually mean? And how can you engage in it? I mean, obviously you're going to engage in it in the way that, other people around you do. And that's what culture's about. That works. But try something that doesn't work and see what you get out of it, or something you think doesn't work, right? Or maybe you're making an interactive art exposition, installation or something like that, or a big video wall, right? Maybe don't put it on the wall, maybe project it on the floor. I don't know. But be willing to take these risks, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And that's where I sort of ran out of ideas of what to talk about. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I think that will give you fodder for conversation. And I look forward to hearing from you. And this has been a lot of fun. It's good for me because it helps me get these ideas out. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. That was fantastic. So I want to encourage people to unmute their microphones and raise their hands. And maybe, Jason, you could stop sharing your screen. That'd be great.
I'm always sharing my screen. Okay.
Great. But I wanted to ask you a question first.
No.
Which is just to talk about Dick Higgins and Fluxus and how important that is to you, and how much that has informed your own practice and ideas.
Yeah. So
if you don't want to answer that, you don't have to.
Yeah, I don't want to answer that. No. I think Higgins is interesting because this idea of purposelessness actually comes from some stuff that he had written. If you're interested in Dick Higgins, there are like many like 1,000-word articles that you can read, and you start reading this and you go, wow, this guy's just totally off his rocker. But at the same time, he's quite solid.
I guess my question is really like, what drew you to him?
Yeah, I think it's the idea of process, and the idea of like, I was always interested in Fluxus because it was like, where was this stuff coming from? And I don't know how much Fluxus stuff your class is familiar with, or maybe you've played with that. But this was a movement in the 50s and the 60s that basically their goal was to kind of work against the establishment. And there were always forces that seem to arise in art that always want to work against the establishment in some way. And he was sort of anti-institution. He went off to like UC San Diego, or so I can't remember where he went off to California to be a director of the new music program. And I think Disney had given them like millions of dollars or something to do this. And he left after the first year. And he said, this just isn't, this isn't the way that we want to make art. What we want to do is we kind of want to, have this sort of really purposeful or directed kind of process. And Fluxus works tend to be written works. So they're sort of like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Like one of them is like, take a piano and push it into the wall until the piano goes through the wall. Well, I mean, that's kind of hard to actually achieve, right? But some of them are things like make a salad, right? That was, and serve the salad to everybody. And these are kind of off the wall things, but they do make you think about what is a creative process and what comes out of it. So I think the thing that gets, just to pull it, the thing that gets me about it is that, you have an idea, you follow through with that idea, and you have no idea what's going to come out until you get to the end of that idea. And I think that that's a really interesting exploration for me, because I like discovery, and I like even when I'm working on this piece tonight, it's not like there's no score, right? There's just a collection of time frames, and it's like, all right, I'm 3 minutes in, I'm going to go to the next scene now, right? And I have some presets, but I'm changing those, and the piece is always in flux. So I was rehearsing yesterday or Saturday, and I was still making changes to what was going on. And the thing is, I can always come back to this, and there's a sense of familiarity about that, because there's a system, much like a Fluxus score, that there is a system that I can follow, but at the same time, there's an openness to the work that allows me to actually discover things with you while you're watching it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting, though, that your own practice, there's no score you could hand off, right? You could actually hand your system over to someone.
I can hand the software off, right? And somebody else could work within that. And that would be like anybody who, like, you know, if you had a board game or something, but you didn't have instructions, I mean, you could use that board game and just play different games on it, or just make anything out of it. But there would be an affordance within that system that would say, you know, this is what this stuff wants to do, you know, and you can play with it.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Yeah. So I
Thanks, Paige.
Thanks for asking that. Because also the interesting thing is that media study as a department, right, has the artists who, Jerry O'Grady and other people, right, and artists who were here, specifically Tony Conrad, had a really, you know, kind of prolonged engagement with Fluxus, though at the same time had a pretty strong critique of some of it as well. So, but they were profoundly influenced, you know, that this was at the same time that some of those ideas were coming up, that some of the people who were specifically involved in media study were, you know, kind of playing with and thinking about. And so the ethos that you're kind of putting forward is, you know, I really appreciate you saying that media study is different for faculty, students, other artists, but there's also something very, you know, essential about the way that you work, which is about this idea of experimentation and the tinkerer and trying and seeing what happens, which is part of the kind of ethos.
Yeah, I mean, there was like the second New York school of composers that comes out. So you're looking at you're looking at people like John Cage and Jasper Johns and Earl Brown, and oh boy, names are just escaping me right now. And Robert Rauschenberg, which was sort of this grouping of people in the 60s and the 70s that were kind of engaged in this sort of happening idea that, you know, you're playing in the now and something's going to happen. So performance is really interesting to me and key, because it's uncomfortable. Maybe that's the reason. It's really uncomfortable. So it's good to be uncomfortable and figure out. And then if you can be comfortable with being uncomfortable, I think that you're probably in a good place. And I don't know if I follow everything that Fluxus believes in, but there certainly is an ethos there that I gravitate toward. You know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, okay. Well, I just want to thank you for answering that. So let's open it up for questions from people. Just unmute yourself, raise your hand.
Oh, there's people here I know. That's great.
There's, well, first of all, Savannah thanked you for answering her question in your presentation. She said it was helpful. And then Dave had put a couple comments. I don't know if Dave wants to unmute and ask them himself, but he did ask about Brian Eno's oblique strategies. Something he had just discovered and wanted to know if something like that could be refined for the area of media study.
I think it's perfect for media study as it is. I think.
Have you seen them in person? I just came across this, and I guess you can still order them from the Brian Eno store, apparently.
Yeah, I'm a big Eno-phile, so the rest of the conversation will be.
You want to describe them?
Turn to order.
It's like. I think it's like a bundle of note cards. So it's like it essentially just looks like boy, what is it that not Cards Against Humanity kind of deck, right?
So it's a deck of cards. There's been 4 or 5 versions of them. They were originally done with an artist by the name of Tim Schmidt. who passed away. And after I think it was Tim Schmidt, after he passed away, Eno was not going to produce anymore. And so they were two similar artists. I don't know where they were. They were somewhere like in Brighton or something, or maybe they're in London. I don't know. Basically, these cards were designed to get them unstuck. All right.
Mhm.
And the most famous one is, honor the mistake as a hidden intention, which I kind of believe in. And there are other ones like, go for lunch. I think other ones are like, put tape over your mouth, continue to do the same, continue to do so for the next 10 days or something. It's just all these sort of things that seem like non sequiturs, but again, they're procedural things to get you thinking a different way, or to get you out of your rut, to stop, to stop making the same type of work, right? Or, like make as quiet as possible. It's like remove everything. That's another, remove everything and then put it back in, or something like that. So it's these different cards, right? And as Dave was pointing out, there's sort of strategies, oblique strategies, right? They're not direct strategies like, color correct that 14 degrees this way, right? No, they're oblique strategies like, take your film to lunch, or something like that. So anyway, I think that they're a great way to get yourself thinking. I mean, even Cards Against Humanity are great. I mean, there's books like the I Ching, which is another way to divine, different way. I mean, there is something about making media art that's very spiritual, I think. And if you want to get your ideas from opening up the phone book and looking for weird phone numbers.
I know that John Cage referenced the I Ching, I think, as one of his divination.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote many pieces based upon. So the I Ching is this book of divination. There are 64 hexagrams, which are lines of six broken and unbroken lines. And really, you guys should look this up. This is all quite fascinating. But again, it gets down to the idea of what do you do when you get stuck? Well, if you can roll some dice, maybe you got some old D&D dice sitting in the back, and you decide, how am I going to edit? If I need to make a decision, why should I have to make the decision? Let some other system make the decision so that I can get beyond the decision-making process, right? And get to the process of evaluating the decision, right? That's the one thing. I think what they do is they kind of, any of these devices, they upend or they sort of short circuit the idea that any preconception that you might have about what it is that you're trying to do, right? So, you might say, well, if I do that, that might happen, right? So you kind of tell yourself already, well, I'm not going to put that rule into my video game or something like that, or I'm not going to make that cut here because that's a problem. Well, what if you just didn't make the cut at all and you just let it stay there? Whatever, right? So maybe sometimes you need some sort of external thing to tell you or give you a hint at trying something different, and you should follow that. I think that I think sometimes we can get in the way and we can be our worst critics, and you can upend the critic by pulling out a card or doing something different.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. How's your show going?
It's going okay.
I love it. What else?
I have a question in the chat.
Peter Schmidt, thank you.
Yeah. In your presentation and essay, you talked about this theory of practice as experimental and having an attitude of play when making media. It seems counterintuitive to focus on a process without a presupposed end goal. Do you need this? Don't you need this end goal, or what is it you're trying to get to start experimenting to begin with? Wouldn't it be better to work with a systemic approach, just thinking in the context of making your ideas intelligible for further application?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I know that this is kind of the way that I work, and this is the way that works for me. And there's many different ways to get into it. Intelligible is. Let me tell you how I think art works and how media works. All right. There's this process in the middle, right? And I have this slide somewhere, but I took it out because I thought it was too much. But we have this thing that we do, which is called our practice, which we should do every day. I mean, we get up and we journal, or we write a song, or whatever it is, and we're engaged in that. And at some point, we end up with this object. Maybe it's a song, or a video, or a piece of stream of something. I don't know. And then there's this weird thing that happens, and we kind of step back and look at it, and we're no longer the creator. All of a sudden, we become the audience, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, that's not what I thought it was. But when I was inside of it, it was what I thought it was. And I think that that's a very strange sort of split personality to be in. And I think sometimes when you're inside as the artist, you kind of begin to not trust yourself, because when you get outside of the thing and you look in at it, all of a sudden it's like, well, that really wasn't where I thought it was going to be going, right? So what do? Do you try to change what the process was, maybe, or maybe just keep following the process for a while? And you never know. I mean, what is intelligible? I mean, you can have something, I mean, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. You can have something like the Mona Lisa, right? And the Mona Lisa meant one thing to one single person, 200, 300 years ago. And now it means something completely different from what it means now. So intelligibility is in flux, right? You can make these things and just put them out there and say, all right, well, let's see how it resonates, right? I don't know if that answers the question. Do you want to follow up on that? Is that Hamadi's question? All right.
Mm-hmm.
The end goal. I think the end goal is the process for me, to be honest with you. And then anything that comes out of that process is this residual object. And sometimes they fail, Sometimes there's like 2 or 3 seconds of it that's really great. And sometimes it's all good, And sometimes you make it and you forget about it, and you come back to it later with a fresh new perspective, or maybe you're 20 years older or something like that. I think memory, I think being able to work on something and forget about it and come back to it years later is really interesting. So anyway, this thing is still playing over here, isn't it?
It's interesting too, though. Oh, I was just going to say that in the question, this idea of the systematic approach was equated with having an end goal. And there's actually a kind of amazing thing that you build a system, right? So you kind of have this systematic approach, right? You build a system into which inputs happen, and then you play with it, right? So
yeah,
right, like, so it's actually, there are ways in which you have a systematic approach, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah,
from the meta perspective of determining an end goal.
I have a question. Well,
yeah, okay, Nina,
comment.
1 second. Yeah, Nina, thank you. But yeah, just to follow up with what Paige said and just try to answer Hamadi's question. Yeah, I think that there is a system. I think maybe the goal is the system, actually, to be honest. And then I sort of have this tool for making things that look like this, right? They go blah, 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 So anyway, yeah, Nina, what's up?
So from what I understand, you explained, because I kind of had a similar question of asking about what would happen to the pieces that you created, because you're making yourself do these experimental media arts. It's I was just wondering you kind of answered it before, because it's you said you're fine with making a piece and then forgetting about it, and then coming back to maybe 20 years later. But as someone who kind of, it was a long, sorry, I'm trying to form my question.
I think you're doing great. Thank you.
It's just as someone who, I feel a lot of people nowadays are really they don't really do something if there's no purpose of doing it. So I was just wondering if only 1 in a million of your pieces actually pushes through and breaks a boundary and it's something new, then what happens to the other like pieces that like aren't as successful? And you kind of answer that.
Yeah, I mean, they disappear, don't they? I mean,
Yeah.
the media is impermanent, right? I mean, think about all the photographs and movies and recordings that are lost,
Yeah.
right? And we'll never get those back, right? And I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, time is, I'm 52. I'm not going to live forever. And what I'm doing right now is I'm happier than I've ever been because I'm making things, right? And maybe just making things is enough for me, right? And I think there is a purpose. I say purposelessness, but the purpose is probably for me.
Yeah.
And the purpose is because this is sort of what for some reason, my inner voice has driven me to do. And, we totally in respect for anybody, what their inner voice is telling them to do. And, I love that. So for me, it's, this is where I am. Would I make it in LA as a music composer? Probably not. But I'm not there, right? Am I going to make millions of dollars off of this? Probably not. But I don't need $1 million. I just need to be able to survive, and I need this computer to last for another 10 years, But I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, I do this because I don't want to suffer, so I make this stuff. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I have ambitions.
Good.
So
But they're your ambitions, right?
Excuse me?
They're your ambitions, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Then
Yeah.
we will help you in any way to move toward them, right?
Thank you.
Don't think that I don't have ambition. I mean.
Oh, no. No, because like sometimes I feel like my ambitions are, some people might say unreasonable.
Who cares what other people say? What do you think? Do you think they're unreasonable?
No, I think
There's your answer. There's your answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. There's your answer. Are you doing, if you're moving toward who you are and who you want to be, then man, that's all that the universe wants from you is for you to, the universe doesn't want anything, just wants you to live and experience and make things. That's all the universe wants.
Thank you.
You bet.
I think, I would just follow up too. I think this conversation and very interesting in terms of your work in the lineage of like John Cage and Brian Eno, who we talked about earlier, in terms of like a play between, or having like a system of control and then kind of leaving things up to chance, or having generative systems that you don't know where they're going to go.
Right.
So I mean, I think it's interesting too, like even with the most, solid plan and intentions, like you were saying, the artwork becomes something else that, it never is the perfect thing that you have in your head. So it always, comes out differently than you intended, even if you.
Yeah, but I think but when you play cowboys and or cops and robbers or whatever, right? Or whatever games you're playing, I mean, they always come out different, right? Mm-hmm. There may be some rule. I mean, go back to board games, right? I mean, they always come out differently, right? Totally. You're following a set of rules, and you have a different experience every time you play. So this is playing, but I'm building my own game. My game happens to be turning video and audio on and off and reversing it and playing with it. So
so we've got I've got like 3 or 4 questions.
Should we take an audio question?
Yeah, let's do that. I think Dante had his hand raised first.
Hi. How has teaching media study helped you become a better media maker?
Oh man, that's a great question, man. Yeah, because I think it makes, so when you're teaching, right, which is, a wonderful thing, you have to see things from other people's points of view, so like, especially when you're teaching over the network, So if I'm teaching you how a for loop works, or I'm teaching you what RGB values are, or something like that, and if you don't understand it, then I sort of have to change my tact, right? I have to come up with a different way to teach it, and in order to teach it, I kind of have to see it from your standpoint as well. Also, I find that I have the most energy after if I've been teaching for 2 or 3 days, and then I just get this. We're here teaching, hopefully most of us are here because we kind of get a real kick out of working with students, because you're bringing ideas, you're bringing fresh ways of seeing things as well. And, and I'm trying to, show you my ways of seeing things. And it's, again, media is a teaching mechanism. It's a didactic, it's a knowledge creation sort of thing. So you give me your knowledge, I give you my knowledge. So and I find that with my colleagues as well. I pick up ideas from them and things like that. So it's sort of this sort of community, which I know has been really downplayed the last year because of COVID and everything like that. But there is a community of ideas and people here, and we're all learning from each other. And so I become better when I teach because I have to see things your way, right? And I'm learning every day. I'm learning about all sorts of things from you guys, right? And you're younger, but you are steeped in this in a way that I never was. The internet didn't exist when I was born, right? We were landing on the moon, right? So my viewpoint and your viewpoint together make this really interesting sort of media criticism. So I think it's really cool. Thanks, Dante.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Connor?
Yeah, give me a second to remember what my question was.
Take your time.
I think the general gist of it is, how did you go about actually setting up and figuring out what you wanted that whole setup for that kind of performance to be? Like, what encouraged you, or how did you actually end up making all of that?
Yeah. So there's a quote at the beginning of the whole piece that is sort of an homage to Brian Geisen. Brian Geisen, it's, God, what is that saying? I can't remember right now. There is no truth, everything's permissible. I can't remember right now what it is. I believe I'm seeing a nod from Cortland, so maybe that's it. Something along those lines. But it's also the quote from Assassin's Creed, the video game, I believe, or something like that. But this is a quote that Brian Geisen used to say all the time. And Geisen is the person who, along with William Burroughs, sort of came up with the cut-up technique. And the cut-up technique was, there were two versions. Geisen's version was to take a tape recorder, right, and to start recording the tape and just blurb into it, and then fast forward and record something in it, and then rewind and record something in it, and just do this over and over and over for a couple of days until he'd pretty much filled everything up, and you record over sections and all that. And this kind of technique of, layering basically voices onto magnetic tape, right? Very similar to what's going on in this piece, is that there's layering of video and opacities and layering of sounds through this granular cut-up technique. And it's sort of this, taking apart and putting back together of media and material that I think sometimes can create interesting outcomes. So to answer your question, that's how it started. And then, then I thought, okay, what do I want to do is I want to do granular synthesis with video, right? So what I was going to do is I was going to go in and I was going to grab frames and take frames and start spitting them out, like out of order and stuff like that. And there's a problem with that. Video is very, very, it's a fat pipe, as we say, right? There's a lot of bandwidth, a lot of data there, and it was just killing my machine. So what I've learned from doing this is that I need two computers in order to kind of continue to do this. One that's sort of dedicated to video so that I can begin to do, I guess, more evasive or invasive processing of the work. And audio is actually quite cheap, so I could, audio is very, very easy to do. So as far as it doesn't require a lot of bandwidth. So I wasn't able to achieve that. So I had to find another answer, right? And the answer was to go to OBS Studio and try to hack it, right? And then by doing that, I found out, it has a WebSocket server. I can send it data from the audio and turn it into like video control. And then I found out when I was just screwing around that, if I went outside the parameters of what the filters in OBS Studio is expecting to see, then all of a sudden I created a new event, right? So I was sort of making the machine do what I did. So it's that entire process of like, I'd like to do this, all right? I want to cut up video like I can cut up sound. That doesn't work. So now I got to do this, and now I got to do this. And it's like, I have to keep going. And, the best thing is to have a deadline. A page is there at the end going, I'll see you next week. And I'm just like, everything's falling apart, right? And it's when everything's falling apart that usually I would just freak out, right? But I think I'm getting to this point where it's like, okay, everything's falling apart. That's kind of what I'm trying to do, And then eventually you fix it, right? And right before we started today, the audio snapped out. But we figured it out. It worked. Do you have a follow-up, Connor? Was that close? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I definitely think that answered my question. I don't really think I have anything to add on to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. And there's a question from Dan in the chat. In one of your writings that we read today, you write a line that says, one must learn the rules in order to know how to break them. I was wondering if you could talk about what some of these rules are, what is created when rules are followed, and what is created when rules are broken.
Ooh, that's a really good question. So a lot of my work that I'm doing comes out of computational work. So I'm programming systems, right? I'm not going, so what are the rules? That's actually, I'm kind of going away. I think I think I was talking about when I was in music school and I was in composition school and people were trying to teach me how to compose, and they would give me a book, and this book would tell me how to arrange the notes in a certain way, right? And there are systems. It's called music theory, right? And there's a Western music theory which says that this is the way it's been done, and it sort of progresses at a slow rate, and it's at a glacial rate. Things change very slowly. And I was always told by my professors that it's like, look, let's just do it this way for now, because this is what we know works, right? So that we have nice, clean harmonies and no dissonance and stuff like that. If you follow these rules, I guarantee you, at some point, you will know enough to break the rules in the right way, all right? So I think that to read your question, one must learn the rules in order to know how to break them. I think that was, I'd have to go back and read that, but I think what I was talking about there is that what I was being told, right? One must learn the rules in order to break them. Well, I'm saying like, maybe you should just make your own rules, right? Which is what artists do all the time. It's called a manifesto, perhaps. And you can come up with your own way of seeing the world, and you can try it out, right? And if it doesn't work and it doesn't reflect with you, you can try something different. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly. If you could talk about what some of those rules are and what is created when rules are. So what is created when rules are followed? Stasis. Okay. So if we were all still composing like Mozart did, 300, 400 years ago, we'd still have that, right? And there's probably a lot of systemic weirdness that is also built into power, and I'm sure that Paige has talked to you about this. Believe me, power doesn't want things to change, right? We're never going to get to that $15 minimum wage because the rule is that states are in charge, right? The rule is that we have a filibuster. The rule is this. Sometimes you need to change the rules, and you need to be willing to do that. I think in art, you have the same sort of hierarchical you have gallery systems. You certainly have competitions and things like this, and which are looking for a certain type of thing, and you're sort of shopping your ideas around and stuff like that. So if that's what you're interested in, I'm kind of getting off the subject right now. So just to say that if things don't change, then you're going to get the same thing over and over and over again. and you'll get this reciprocal kind of going back, like, well, this didn't work and this didn't work, so we're going to go back and forth. And I think that you kind of reach a stasis in creativity, in art. So you kind of need a nudge. You need some sort of, oblique strategy, perhaps, to break yourself out of what you're doing. And that's when I think you need to break the rules, right? And
yeah. So let's take one more question, because I think we've been going quite a long time. So there's one last question from Mohammed. Do you want to actually unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
Nothing is true, nothing is permitted.
Or you just want us to read the quote? Your okay. So Portland, do you want to read it?
Yeah, Mohammed's writing that if there was anything I learned from this lecture, it was go with the flow when it comes to art. Was there anything that you ever regretted doing or that happened over the course of your career? And is there anything we should know or sort of be prepared for?
I mean, that's kind of hard because, it's like you kind of end up where you end up, right? And there's that. I think something that I did for a long time, and we all do this, and maybe I'm, is that when I was making art, right, I always thought about my audience, right? And you should think about your audience, right? But you shouldn't necessarily try to please your audience, all right? You shouldn't work out of trying to appease them, right? You shouldn't, some people do, right? And that's fine, But I think that I should have spent more time, and I don't know. I mean, there's no regrets. I mean, it's just what it is, right? But I always wonder what would have happened if, like, day one, I didn't go to music school and I just went to art school and said, I'm going to start a band. Instead of thinking, well, I'm kind of interested in music, so I should go to music school. Well, I'm kind of interested, So I guess that is to say is that you don't know where it's going to come from, and don't think that by adopting some external system that it's going to always inform you and give you the answers you're looking for. Because I spent about 20 years not finding the answers I was looking for until one day, I went and got I got interested in music technology, and I went and got a master's degree. And then all of a sudden I was sort of making things that's like, oh, this is what I should have been doing, right? And, there's no right or wrong. It takes time. You have a long life ahead of you, and you'll figure out where you're going to go and what's going to happen. Oh, the things you'll do. So there's no right or wrong, but, if I didn't go to music school, I wouldn't be able to talk to you about John Cage and, what's his name? Schmidt. What is Schmidt's name again? About the I Ching and all that, because I wouldn't have had that history behind me. So we are conglomerates of our experience. So yeah, there you are.
Thank you. Well, thank you for giving us this experience, Jason.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, this
nice
is really
close.
great. And again, thank you for your performance. So a muted microphone applause for you. And
you too. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll see all of you next week when Girish Shambhu gives a talk, and a reminder for students to that your responses are due on Friday before 5 o'clock, and that your Cinetract videos, your 1-minute videos, are due a week on April 9th. Okay. So yeah. We'll see you next week, and thank you so much, Jason.
Oh, thank you, guys. I'm just going to hang out until you shut it off. Okay.
Okay. We generally shut it off.
Okay. Thank you all very much.